Hello everyone. Today we have something very special to share with you. A real testimony of life transformation through Christ. If you also have a remarkable story with God, we would love to hear it. Your journey can inspire, heal, and touch the hearts of others who are in need of hope. Leave your testimony in the comments. Who knows? Maybe it will appear here in a future video. Now open your heart, because today's story is deep, sincere, and will certainly touch you. My name is Plinio. I am 42 years old. I work as a contract officer, and until not long ago, my life was taking a completely different path. My family is Thai, and as many of you know, around 95% of the population in Thailand is Buddhist. It was no different for me. I grew up in this tradition, which was passed down from generation to generation as part of our identity. My parents were always very firm on this point. Even if we live outside of Thailand, we must remain true Thais. And being Thai for them automatically included being Buddhist. From an early age, I heard this message at home and at the temple. This is who we are. It was as if it were in our blood. On Sundays, my brother and I would go with our parents to the Buddhist temple. During summer vacation, we would spend the mornings learning the Thai language, and along with it, Buddhism. We learned to respect the monks, to practice meditation, and to bow. It was also natural to us. We knew no other reality. But something started to change when I was about 12 and my brother was 10. It was around this time that we began to experience strange experiences, which we would later understand as spiritual manifestation. I remember the first time well. I clearly heard someone calling my name when I was alone at home. I thought it was my mother, but no one was there. And it was not an isolated episode. Doors would close by themselves. Objects would seem to move. Voices would whisper our names in the silence of the early morning. At first, we thought maybe it was our imagination or that we had watched too many movies. But the episodes repeated themselves. And it wasn't just me. My brother was also hearing and seeing things. We started talking amongst ourselves because our parents just didn't believe it. They thought it was a child's thing. But for us, it was very real. I remember the feeling of fear, but also of curiosity. This made me wonder, is there something beyond what we can see? Is there a spiritual world? I sought answers within what I knew, Buddhism. I went to one of the monks and asked if there was a God. He calmly replied, "In Buddhism, there is no God." What Buddha taught was a way to deal with human suffering. The idea was simple but profound. Life is suffering, and suffering comes from attachment. If we learn not to cling to things which are temporary, we suffer less. This was the basis of the Buddhism I had learned, a philosophy of life, more than a religion with a personal God. Meditation, self-control, balance, detachment. But over time, I realized that the Buddhism practiced in our community, and in Thailand as well, was not just this pure philosophy. There was something more, a folk spirituality mixed with animist beliefs, spirits of trees, rocks, and waters, offerings, shrines, and rituals to appease invisible entities. It was as if Buddhism had absorbed the spiritual folklore of the local culture. It was common to see spirit houses in front of homes and businesses where people would leave food, flowers, and incense, all to keep the spirits happy and away from trouble. That was the context in which I grew up. And for a long time, that was enough for me. But something was still missing, although I didn't know what it was. When I went to college, I met people from different backgrounds and religions. It was there that I first heard someone talk about Jesus. I confess that at first, I listened with some skepticism. After all, I was a Buddhist. I was Thai. And in my mind, that was synonymous with the same thing. Every now and then, I would engage in conversations about spirituality. Sometimes I would share Buddha's teachings with others. Other times, I would hear about Christianity. It was never an aggressive discussion. It was always a respectful conversation. But even then, I had a firm conviction inside me. I would never become a Christian. I saw no reason to. Buddhism gave me answers. It taught me how to live. I felt comfortable. But everything changed in one simple, seemingly ordinary moment. I was sitting in the car with a friend. It was an afternoon like any other. But something about that conversation was different. She began to tell me about Jesus again. Only this time I really listened. It wasn't just words or arguments. It was the way she spoke. There was sincerity, compassion, and living faith in her eyes. I realized that for her, Jesus was real. Not an idea, not a concept, but a person. She didn't try to convince me. She didn't use verses as weapons. She just spoke from her heart. And that touched me. For the first time, I thought, what if this Jesus is who she says he is? What if he's true? That question kept echoing in my mind for days. It wasn't a sudden change, but it was the beginning of a journey that would change everything. It was at that moment, as we sat in the car, that something inside me began to snap. I was ready for another conversation, perhaps even to explain my views on Buddha as I always did. But there was something different about this conversation. The way she shared Jesus was not top-down, nor was it in the tone of someone trying to win an argument. It was with genuine care. with a peace that overflowed in her eyes and words. She spoke about Jesus as if she were introducing a dear friend, without imposition, without pressure, just with love. And this love broke down barriers that I didn't even know were still standing inside me. It was as if, as she spoke, my heart was making room for something new, even if I didn't yet know what it was. She told me about how Jesus loved me personally, how he died on the cross for my sins, and how he had risen again, conquering death. More than that, she told me that he wanted to have a relationship with me. Not a religious relationship, but something living and intimate. It was a simple explanation, not at all theological or complex, but it was the first time that story had really touched me, for real. At the end, I thanked them for the conversation. I said something like, "Thank you for sharing Jesus with me. Now let me tell you about Buddha." And I shared what I believed. Still, that conversation stayed with me. It was like a seed planted, silent, unobtrusive, but alive. I didn't realize it right away, but something began to change there. After that, I started going to church every now and then. It wasn't out of spiritual search, at least not consciously. It was more because my Christian friends invited me, and I enjoyed the company. But, even without realizing it, every word sung, every message heard, every simple gesture of love in that community was touching my heart in subtle ways. In my mind, though, there was still a barrier. To me, Jesus seemed to belong to the West, to Western culture, and I was Thai. In my upbringing, to be Thai was to be Buddhist, period. Jesus seemed outside, and on top of that, Christianity seemed very exclusive to me. When I heard someone say that Jesus was the only way, it sounded closed-minded, almost arrogant. In Buddhism, the door is always open to dialogue with other religions. It is a very inclusive tradition. We embrace ideas, concepts, practices, anything that makes sense and brings peace. So saying that there is only one path seemed very harsh to me, but I kept listening, watching. A part of me was starting to wonder, what if this Jesus is in fact who they say he is? By this time, I already believed in God to some extent, although it was not the focus of my faith. Despite what traditional Buddhism teaches, that there is no personal God, in practice, my spirituality was more like folk Buddhism. Sometimes I would pray before a statue of Buddha as if I were speaking to a higher power. I would ask for protection, help, guidance. For me, Buddha had a kind of spiritual power, even though I knew deep down that this was not exactly the official doctrine. And so perhaps I saw Jesus and Buddha as almost different paths to the same something greater. I thought, maybe Jesus is their way of connecting with God and Buddha is mine. But that view began to unravel over time, especially as my emotional life began to fall apart. It was during college that my mental health began to show signs that something was wrong. I began to deal with episodes of severe depression and was diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD. The obsessions came as intense, repetitive thoughts that caused me overwhelming anxiety. I felt like I needed to perform certain mental or physical rituals to protect the people I loved. I remember walking down hallways and feeling that voice inside me say, "If you don't scream now, something bad is going to happen to your mother." And it was a fear so real, so overwhelming, that sometimes I would give in. I would scream. I would do whatever it took to silence that invisible threat. Other times I would resist, but I would pay the price in hours of anguish. Depression and OCD turned my routine into a battlefield. It was hard to study, stay focused, dream about the future. Trying to finish college already seemed like an achievement. Getting a job, keeping that job. It was like climbing a mountain with rocks in my pockets and blindfolded. I sought help. I went to college counselors who eventually referred me to specialists outside of college, saying my case was more serious than they could treat. I went to therapists, psychologists, and psychiatrists. During the worst periods, he took about 12 pills a day. 12. I knew it was a lot. I knew something needed to change. I thought, if this is how it is now in my early 20s, what will the rest of my life be like? At the same time, I held on even tighter to what I knew. I intensified my Buddhist practice. I meditated for long periods, prayed alone at home, and went to the temple at night to pray with the monks. I sought in every way to alleviate the suffering that seemed to never end. But over time, I began to realize something that was hard to admit. Buddhism recognizes suffering. Yes, in fact, that is its basis. But it did not offer me a way out or any hope. It was like a philosophy for surviving better, not for being cured. The idea was, yes, life is suffering. But if you practice detachment, prayer, and meditation, maybe you can get through it with less pain. And maybe in the next life, you'll be reborn in a better condition. But for me, that wasn't enough. I didn't want to just survive. I wanted hope, a meaning, a real relief. And it was in that void, at that point of exhaustion, that something new began to ignite. At the age of 25, after years of struggling with my inner battle, I decided to seek help once again. I went to a new therapist recommended by a friend. I remember it like it was yesterday. At the first appointment, while I was still sitting down before I asked any questions, he looked me in the eyes with a gentle expression and said to me in a calm voice, "Just so you know, this is a Christian center. Are you okay with that?" At that moment, I was already exhausted, broken, desperate. I no longer had the strength to put up barriers, so I answered sincerely, "It's okay. I don't care. I just wanted help. I just wanted to get out of that dark place where my mind seemed to have been stuck for years." Every time we met, he asked if he could pray for me. And every time, without hesitation, I said yes. He prayed right there in front of me, with his eyes closed and his words simple, as if he were talking to someone he knew intimately. At the time, I didn't make any connection between those prayers and the changes that began to happen. I didn't realize it right away, but it was with him, and only with him, that I began to improve. Slowly, something inside me began to calm down. The mental fog gave way to clarity. The anxiety was no longer so overwhelming. And eventually, I stopped taking the medication. By the time I was about 25, I realized that my life had become manageable. There were still struggles, yes, but it was no longer an unbearable chaos. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe. Even the spiritual experiences that had marked my adolescence continued to occur, but less frequently. They were there, yes, like distant shadows, but they no longer dominated my days as before. I moved on. At the age of 30, I decided to go back to school to complete my postgraduate degree. I was excited and focused, but it was precisely at this time that something unexpectedly shook me up again. It was an ordinary day. I was in my brother's room studying, focused, when I got hungry. I quickly went up to the kitchen to get something to eat, and when I came back, something completely out of the ordinary happened. As I walked through the door, I saw a figure. A dark shadow passed in front of the light in the room, and it wasn't an impression or a quick scare. I could clearly see the outline of arms, legs, and head. For a second, I thought it was someone from the house, maybe my father, maybe someone who had come in without me noticing. But the room was empty. I stood still. A chill ran down my spine. That was different from anything I had ever experienced. Since I was a child, I heard sounds, felt presences. But that was the first time that was something with my own eyes. That stayed in my head for days. Over the weekend, I decided to go to the Buddhist temple. I spoke to one of the monks and explained what I had seen. He listened to me attentively and naturally replied, "Yes, there are spirits in this world. Sometimes they remain because they were unable to pass on to the next life." Curious, I asked why. He said that this happens when the spirit does not have merit enough. What in Thai we call boon. I asked if there was anything I could do to help. The monk suggested that I share my merit with that spirit. He explained to me how I should go home, meditate, and during the meditation, offer my merit as a way to help him move forward. I followed it to the letter. I went back home, went to my brother's room, and sat down to meditate. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and in the middle of the meditation, I said, "I will share my merit with you." At that moment, I felt the environment change. The air became denser, colder, and it wasn't a common cold. It was as if the temperature suddenly dropped inside me. A shiver ran through my entire body. Something was there. I got up confused and went to my parents. I asked if they were feeling cold. They looked at me strangely and said no, that the house was normal. At that moment, something alerted me. It wasn't physical. Something had happened. For the next 2 weeks, the cold didn't go away. Inside my own house, I wore a coat, a hat, and even gloves. It was February, yes, but my friends were wearing t-shirts and shorts, and I felt as if a window was always open, blowing a constant invisible wind. But that wasn't all. I began to feel as if I was being watched. I could see shadows moving in the corner of my eye. At night, I could hear footsteps and whispers. The atmosphere in the house felt tense, as if something was trying to suffocate me. I was 30 years old, but I felt like a scared kid. So scared that one day I simply packed my things, put them in a suitcase, and went to a friend's apartment near my college. I spent days sleeping on his couch and going to class in the morning. But the relief was short-lived. One night, I saw the same shadowy figure pass by the wall of his apartment. Then I realized that the problem wasn't the house. It was me. It was following me. I didn't want it to affect my friend or his roommate. So once again, I packed my things and headed straight to the temple. I arrived around 10:30 at night and knocked on the door. The monk welcomed me with compassion, gave me a room to sleep in, and the next morning we performed Buddhist rituals, offerings, and prayers, all with the aim of appeasing the spirit. He told me, "If it doesn't get better, come back." And it didn't get better. A few days later, I went back to the temple. I explained that I still felt the presence, that the cold persisted, that I continued to see and hear things. The monk listened to me in silence and then said something that has stuck in my mind. Some people are weaker-minded and therefore are more affected by these spiritual things. That felt like a weight on my chest. What do you mean a weak mind? It sounded like a verdict, like there was nothing left to do, like I was doomed to live like this, like it was my fault. I left the temple feeling even more empty than when I entered. For the first time, I asked myself honestly, is there another way? Could Jesus be the answer that Buddhism, as much as I respected it, never gave me? Hearing those words from the monk shook me deeply. The idea that I had a weak mind, as if it were inherent to me, as if it were something without a cure, without a solution, that made me feel inferior, useless, no way out. I left the temple with a heavy weight on my chest and a suffocating anguish. I was 30 years old and felt as if I was trapped by life. That night, I left class around 10 o'clock and walked to my car slowly, as if carrying an invisible burden. As I walked, my mind was in a whirl. I'm in trouble. I don't know what's happening to me. How am I going to live like this? Will my life always be like this? I got into the car, started the engine, and then something unexpected happened. The radio, which was usually tuned to hip-hop or pop music stations, was different that night. Instead of music, the voice of a preacher could be heard. I was confused for a second. I looked at the display. It was indeed my radio. I thought, what is a pastor doing at my station? And then another thought came like a whisper inside me. What if this is a sign from God? I decided to listen. The preacher began with a question that stopped me in my tracks. Have you ever felt like you were in the middle of the ocean with waves crashing into you from all sides? I, sitting there in the car, said in a low voice, yes, that's exactly how I feel right now. He continued, have you ever wondered why God would let you go through this? Once again, the answer within me came immediately. Try. Then he said something that touched me deeply. Sometimes God allows those waves to hit you not to sink you, but to push you closer to Him. At that moment, I couldn't hold it in any longer. It was like something was aligning inside me. If all this I'm living is to find God, then fine. I'm going to seek Him. And you decide. On Sunday, I will visit a church. The following Sunday, without telling anyone, I went to my friend's church, the same friend who had told me about Jesus 10 years earlier. I walked in quietly, not wanting to draw attention to myself, and sat in the back corner. I didn't go to socialize. I went to seek something I couldn't name, but that my soul longed for. As the service began and the first strains of hymns filled the room, something inside me broke. I began to cry. A silent but intense cry. I covered my face with my hands, trying to hide it, but the tears just wouldn't stop. It was as if something was being ripped out of me, something that had been suppressed for many years. Then came the sermon. The pastor began to preach about cursed demons, and he began to describe spiritual situations, presences, cold breezes, feelings of being watched. My heart raced. This is exactly what I'm living, I thought. It was no coincidence. It could not possibly be. That was for me. At the end of the service, with her eyes still wet, my friend saw me and came over to me. He said I looked bad and asked if everything was okay. I replied that I was going through something difficult, but I couldn't explain it. The only person I told was a monk, I confessed. She respected my silence. Okay, but at least let us pray for you. I nodded. I walked to the front of the church where pastors and leaders were waiting for people who needed prayer. They asked me what they could pray for me about. I gave them a summary. I didn't go into detail, but from the message that day, they seemed to understand exactly. One of the pastors said to me, "We can pray for you, and maybe you'll feel better. But the only way to be truly free is to accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior." At the time, my response was automatic. "No, I'm a Buddhist." He just smiled gently. "Okay, we'll still pray for you." And they prayed. As they prayed, I felt something shift. It was as if a weight was being lifted from me. I felt lighter, calmer. I left there thinking that maybe it was over. I think I can go home. Maybe now I can sleep in peace. But what happened that night was the opposite of peace. Sleeping in my coat, hat and gloves, still feeling cold, I began to feel touches, like fingers running over my body. The room was dark, but I could see two eyes glowing, looking at me in the darkness. It chilled me to the bone. My heart raced. At that moment, I couldn't take it anymore. I started praying, for the first time really praying. Not a meditation, not a repetition. I spoke to God with simple words from the depths of my despair. If you are real, if it is you who is calling me, then you must help me with my parents. They have always told me that I should remain a Buddhist. If you want me to go down that path, you will have to touch their hearts too. The next morning, Tuesday, before my parents left for the Buddhist church, I asked to talk. They sat me down at the table and listened to me attentively. "I'm going through a really difficult time," I began. They already knew. They were my parents. They could sense when something wasn't right. I took a deep breath and continued. "I think I found something that can help me. It is a religion." "Which one?" they asked. "Christianity." There was silence. And then my mother said, "If you think this can help you, then go ahead." In that instant, I knew God was with me. I was surprised by the simplicity of my parents' response. It was as if all the fear I had about telling them had been disarmed in an instant. My heart still pounding, I felt I needed to take the next step. There was a pastor who lived practically on the same street as me, a neighbor literally. I decided to go to his house. He welcomed me warmly, offered me a seat at the kitchen table, and listened attentively to my entire story. I was tired, confused, emotionally drained, but I also had a little flame burning inside me, a hope I had never felt before. After hearing everything, he looked me in the eyes with impressive calm and said, "Do you want to follow Jesus? Do you want him to come into your life?" I didn't need to think twice. Try. And at that moment, right there, he led me in prayer. Before we even began, something strange happened, almost like a growl, a deep sound coming from deep within, as if something were being confronted. Still, I continued. I repeated the words he was saying. They were simple, but they were filled with something I had never experienced before, truth. And when I finished the prayer, I stood up and thought, I guess I'm a Christian now. But the night was far from over. I still had to go to college, so I drove to the library. On the way, something strange started to happen. A sensation like electricity began to run through my feet. I tried to ignore it. I tried to stop, but I couldn't. It was as if that energy was alive and determined. The sensation moved up my legs, and wherever it went, I felt warmth, a comforting warmth, as if something was being purified. I went to class that night, and by 9 o'clock that feeling had reached the top of my head. Suddenly, the lights in the room started to flicker. 3 times. The teacher stopped talking and jokingly said, "It looks like there's a ghost here." The class burst out laughing, but not me, because deep down I knew, that's me. Something's happening to me. I finished class feeling different, light, warm, alive. On the way to my car, I called my friend, the same one whose couch I'd been sleeping on for the past few weeks. I said I'd stop by. He said there was no point because the power in the apartment was out. But at that moment, I heard something different. A clear voice inside me saying, "If you go, the light will return." After everything I'd experienced that day, I thought, okay, let's see. I drove up to the condo. The lights in the complex were all off. But as soon as I walked through the gate, they all lit up. My friend looked at me in astonishment. "Dude, the power's back on. It's happened 3 times today. Every time you come in, it comes back on." I didn't know what to say. I just knew it wasn't a coincidence. The next day, I told the pastor everything that had happened. He smiled as if he had seen this before and said, "Pliny, when you accepted Jesus, the Holy Spirit entered you. He expelled everything that tormented you. Now you are no longer alone. God lives in you." That morning, I woke up feeling like I was seeing the world for the first time. It was like he had taken off a pair of sunglasses I didn't even know I was wearing. Everything seemed more vivid, more colorful. The sky was bluer. The sun seemed warmer. The sounds of birds, which I had never noticed, were clear as bells. I stood there for a while just feeling. Jesus is real, I thought. He sees me. And I started to hyperventilate, to cry. But it was a good cry, a cry of liberation. At that moment, I knew I needed to truly know him, to know who this Jesus was who took me out of the darkness. Since then, my life has been a constant journey of discovery, faith, and transformation. Sometimes I still find myself asking God, why didn't you save me when I was 18? Before the depression, the OCD, the medication, the suffering. And in the silence of my heart, I feel God answer me. Because now all of this can be used. And it's true. Today, when I talk to someone who is struggling mentally, spiritually, or emotionally, I don't just offer advice, I offer empathy. Because I've been there. And I know the way back. I learned that God uses our wounds to heal others. And today I see meaning even in the pain I experienced. If I could say one thing to you who are listening to this right now, it would be, throughout my youth, what I was looking for was up. Something beyond the routine of studying, working, getting married, having children, and dying. All of that is good, but I always felt there had to be something bigger. And I found it. I found purpose, peace, and direction in Jesus. Many people live believing that they are good enough to go to heaven. We think that if we do more good than bad, God will accept us, as if heaven were decided by a scale. But the gospel is not about deserving. It's about grace. Jesus didn't come to put you on the scales. He came to take you off them. And it all starts with a simple prayer, with an open heart like I did that night. If he did it to me, he can do it to you too. Think about it. Imagine a judge, someone who is truly fair. He is faced with a delicate case. The defendant is a doctor, a man who has saved hundreds of lives throughout his career. But one day he made a terrible decision. He drove drunk and took someone's life. Now, could this judge, as good as he was, simply say, "Look, you've already done so much good, let's just let this one slide"? Of course not. Because a fair judge cannot close his eyes to justice, even if the defendant is a good person most of the time. If we expect this from an earthly judge, imagine God's standard of justice, the supreme judge. God is perfectly just. He can't just overlook our mistakes because we've done good things in other areas of our lives. His justice demands that there be payment for sins. And here's where the gospel becomes so powerful. We cannot pay this debt alone. No good deed can erase what we have done wrong. That is why God, being also love, did the unthinkable. He sent his own son, Jesus, to take our place. Jesus lived a sinless, flawless life. He took upon himself the punishment that was ours. He died on the cross, and 3 days later he rose again. He defeated death, he conquered sin, he disarmed the devil. And because of that, he can forgive you. It's as if we were stuck with an unpayable debt, and someone from outside came into the room and said, "I'll pay for everything. He can go free." That's what Jesus did. It's grace. It's a gift. You just have to accept it. This is my sincere prayer for anyone who is listening to this right now. If you are still unsure, if you are still wondering about all of this, please investigate, research, question, dig deep. Because this is the most important question anyone can ask. What happens after death? We invest so much in the future, right? We research colleges, look for the best job, plan for retirement, but many of us spend our entire lives without thinking about what comes next. Don't do that. This is the only part of the future that no one can avoid. Today, I am a Christian, but my journey is not over. My parents have not yet accepted Jesus. I pray for them every day. I also pray for my brother. As far as I know, I am the only Christian in my family. At first, my parents were quite accepting of my decision. But 2 weeks later, questions began to arise. They realized it wasn't just a phase. I had returned to them all the Buddhist objects I owned. I felt that throwing them away would be disrespectful. They looked at me and asked, "Are you sure about that? You are the eldest son, so who will take care of the religious rites when we die?" And I didn't know what to answer. In the Thai Buddhist context, when someone passes away, there is an important ceremony. You go to the temple, serve food to the monks, give offerings, all to ensure merit for the deceased person's soul so that they can have a good next life. They wanted to know, what now? Who will do it for us? And I could only say, "Mom, Dad, I don't know. I just know that I need to follow Jesus now." Soon after, I began to pray more intensely. I cried at the feet of God, asking for the salvation of my parents and my brother. And it was during this time that a strange question began to arise in my mind, over and over again. Do you love me more than you love your parents? At first I thought it was all in my head, or maybe even a provocation from the enemy. But the question kept coming back, in the shower driving before going to sleep. Do you love me more than you love your parents? Until one day, already tired, praying before going to sleep, I answered honestly, "Yes, God, I love you more than I love my parents." At the time, I felt horrible, almost like a traitor. But then I heard in a whisper full of love, "Don't you know that I love your parents more than you?" That took me apart. The peace I felt was like a blanket over my heart. I have continued to pray for them ever since, but now with a different kind of confidence, because I know that God loves them deeply, and He wants to save them more than I do. So if there's one thing I can leave you with today, it's this: trust in Jesus. He won't let you down. He's not waiting for you to be good enough. He just wants you to come. Thank you so much for listening this far. That was my testimony. And if you were touched by this story, if you felt something different inside, don't ignore it. Maybe today is your day. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take advantage and subscribe. Like it, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and comment below. Do you have a testimony of faith? We want to hear your story too. Remember, God's presence transforms everything. May He bless you, your home, your journey, today and always, until the next testimony.